All right, welcome to the first lecture of week 3, and this week we're really going to jump into equine behavior, and it's something I'm very passionate about. I love watching animals in the wild, how they behave, how they respond to stimuli, and that carries over into our domestic species, and it's really important, behavior for when we want to train them or just working with these animals on a daily basis. So hopefully the next 6 lectures will give you some basal understanding of natural behavior. Now, I start this lecture off, with talking about the senses, and, obviously very similar to our own, as we're mammals too. But, going back, that's why we talk about the history of the horses and donkeys and the zebras as they developed, they're developing as they evolved, to survive predation and survive in the wild, in these outdoor harsh environments with weather and all the other things that are against them, so they've developed the senses to survive in these environments. Now, you have to think horses or, the other equids, they're constantly evaluating their environment really for threats, and then they're also looking at things for food, or if they're looking for potential mates, or hey, the weather's changing, and they take notice of that. And it's something that you need to be aware of, that they're constantly doing that. And funny enough, if you think about it, as humans, we're constantly doing that too all the time. We just do it, a lot of it we're doing it subconsciously. Next time you're walking down the street, wherever you are in the world, or you're walking down somewhere, just kind of pay attention to your behavior. You tend not to think about this, but you're looking, if you're near cars, is that car a threat? Traffic, if somebody's approaching you, you look at them and you're like, okay, are you a threat or not? Am I safe? You're constantly making these decisions. Horses are doing that too. So, we're going to talk about the different senses that the horses have. So, obviously one of the most important ones is sight. For any of us as mammals, sight's an important part of that, but it's important to remember you will run into either partially blind horses or fully blind horses, and they can have, good quality of life. So, without some of these, like us, they can have a great life and don't need to be euthanized or anything like that. Sound, obviously, the donkeys have the huge ears. Compared to horses, but sound's very important that we're going to talk about. Smell, they have a really highly developed sense of smell compared to us. Taste, maybe not as, particular than us, but they do taste different things. And then touch, obviously, touch is important to them. So we'll kind of jump into these. So starting with sight, horses have these eyes that are set wide apart. And I like to compare it to predators because, the prey animals, their eyes to the side of their head, and where as predators, our eyes are set in the front. And what that does is it gives the horses and other animals like them a wider view of peripheral vision, whereas predators, we have greater binocular vision. So if we actually looked at what the horse could see, and you could see this large field almost all the way behind them, that's their peripheral vision. So we call that monocular vision because they're looking out with one eye. Now, their binocular vision is not as great, which is what's straight ahead. So they have limited depth perception. They can't quite focus in as well as we can. But they still can. I mean, they still have some binocular vision, just not as great as ours. But really, it's that monocular vision. So if you look, if you're looking at a computer screen or your phone or however you're watching these lectures, your head's straight ahead looking at the screen, but you notice you can still see off to your sides. You just can't focus in. And how we use our vision is, say something, moves quickly over there, we'll turn our head and focus in on it with our binocular vision. Well, imagine that range almost all the way behind you, and you could still see things way back here, and that's how a horse sees. So pretty neat with their vision. A couple other things with that is they have, much better night vision capability than we do, so they can see things a lot better. And then their color vision is a thing called dichromatic. So you can see the color chart there with the human on the left, horse on the right. We can see, more aggressive, I guess, green colors, and particularly reds, which horses can't see reds. And horses are more of a bluish, yellow, gray type range of color that they can see. So they can see some color, just not as great as us. And if you look at these slides, the A and B is what we would see, and the C and D is what a horse would see. So, especially when I talk about training and for my students is, you got to kind of keep this in mind because, if you're looking at different color patterns and different jumps or different types of events, it may be important to have colors that a horse can actually see clearly versus some of these ones that kind of blend into the environment. It makes it a little bit more difficult for them. Now, obviously they have much larger ears than us, and the donkeys have, greater ears than horses, and could be just where they evolved in those deserts, where they could catch sounds much further than the horses that developed on the plains of North America. But what they do is they catch the sound waves with these ears, and they have great movement of ears, and they direct those sound waves into the inner ear where they can hear the sound. Now, horses, often in training we use particular words, and I'd say probably the one most everybody recognizes is whoa. Whoa, and we use that to slow down or a horse. They don't know what whoa means, but it's how we say it is how the horse can perceive it. So when I go whoa and I train my horse like that, whenever they hear that, they'll know that I want them to stop. But if I go one day and said whoa, at a high pitch or something like that, they would probably misunderstand what I was trying to say because they don't speak English or whatever your language is. They don't speak it, but how we present the cue with our pitch and amplitude is how they perceive it. Now, some other cool things about horses with hearing is they can hear with their legs. So their leg bones can actually detect vibrations in the ground. And again, thinking about how they evolved, if the herd starts running or it's late at night and they don't see it or whatever, and there's another herd of horses running towards them, or prey animals are pretty good at sneaking around, but any other type of animal that's running, maybe say from a potential predator, horses can detect that in the ground, and then they can take off and evaluate that threat. Also, it's cool to think with animal behavior, one of the things that always amazes me is how animals can almost detect earthquakes way before we can. So some of these innate abilities they have that maybe we haven't yet defined in all species is what gives them an advantage in the wild, say versus us, where, I've been in plenty of earthquakes in my life growing up in California, and you don't know it until it hits you, and it's pretty scary, but the animals know it way before it does. Now, the smell of the equids is very acute. They have a really, really good sense of smell, and they use this all the time. So a lot of times, like in this picture, you can see them nose to nose, and they're trying to determine, do you smell good? Are you something I recognize? Mares and foals, mares do quite a bit of licking and nuzzling and with their young foal, trying to, recognize them as hers. And sense of smell is one of the ways they do that. And they've got, obviously a greater sense of smell than we do, and they have these large nasal cavities dominated with many, many chemoreceptors. And the horse on the left is doing what we call the Flehmen response, and we'll talk more about this in another lecture, but they draw those smells in to where those chemoreceptors can read it and determine, if it's friend, foe, or whatever they're trying to do. Now, the next sense is taste. So obviously closely related to smell. I mean, we know that. We go into a bakery, everything smells delicious, and then it tastes delicious, and it's really good. If something smells really kind of putrid, that's kind of a warning for us not to eat it, because it not only does it taste bad, it's probably bad for us. So with horses and the other equids, they can actually determine, they can taste sweet and bitter. So that's why a lot of times you'll see for horse feed what we call a sweet feed, which is added molasses or cane sugar or other things that people may put in there. And the horses really like it. They gobble it up because it tastes good. Things like poisonous plants, if a horse goes and nibbles on that, they tend to be bitter. The poisonous plant does that for survival of that plant. So the horse will avoid or learn to avoid those type of plants. Now, it doesn't say horses can't eat poisonous plants. They do, and we'll talk about this in pasture management. But more often than not, they tend to avoid those. And then Foals, like this foal licking this car, I mean, they use this a lot in early life to explore. Some belief that they get their gut bacteria by doing a lot of this, exploring their environment and using their mouth, so they get some of this natural bacteria in their gut that helps them with digestion. Now, touch, obviously, horses can feel touch, and the different things like we can feel. They use this quite a bit, as far as reinforcing social bonds, nurturing these two horses, obviously kind of friendly with each other, or they'll use it as aggression. They'll bite, they'll kick. So obviously that's an important aspect of their abilities. Their muzzle, it's good to know that it's highly innervated. It's a lot of nerves there, and that's important too, especially with these whiskers. So when they're on the ground feeling around, which they can't quite see the tip of their nose, again going back to their eyesight, not really great binocular vision, plus a little bit of a blind spot right there. When they're down on the ground, their whiskers and that nose can feel around and find the forage that they're looking to eat. So it's always important to remember that. And then other sensitive areas, the lower leg, the flank, neck, and shoulders, which I just have highlighted here. These are really sensitive areas too. So if, like, say you're grooming with a hard brush or curry comb, you want to make sure you're careful around these areas, that you don't really rub hard, especially skin on bone. Obviously those areas are going to be sensitive in the lower legs, but also the neck and the flanks. Again, areas that they're pretty sensitive to the touch. So that's just kind of, an overview of how horses are perceiving their environment. And we're just going to keep building upon this, getting into natural behavior. So the next lecture, we'll kind of talk about, how they communicate with body language and vocally. So I'll see you then.